Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Jules. Can you hear me?
Yep. You hear me all right?
Yep.
Cool.
Excited about this one, man. Um, Hi, Andres.
Thanks. I'm gonna
Hey, how are you?
connect from my computer as well, so I can present from my computer.
Perfect. I already shared access, so let's see if that works and give it a few so some more people join. And if not, if that's all right, we can start at 6:03.
Yep, no worries. No rush. Let me just try to bring it up on my computer. Can you see the screen all right?
Yeah, I can see it perfectly. I'm recording, by the way, so since it's asynchronous, everyone will get a chance to see it later. And I can share the recording with you too.
All right, cool.
Okay, I think we can get started. So first of all, thanks, Jules, for taking the time to do this talk. Very excited to learn about your experience, about leadership, and I don't want to spend too much on the introduction, so take it away.
All right, thanks, Pedro. All right, so today we'll be talking about leadership principles. And before we get into it, I want to address the sort of management versus leadership question, right? What's the difference between them? How are they distinct? I think an interesting way to address this is looking at the etymology of the words. So management, the core element manage, actually comes from the old French manège, which actually means horsemanship. So like how to guide a horse. Who is a good jockey or somebody who handles a horse, who's a good horseman, somebody who gets the horse to go where he wants, essentially. So that's the root of management. Manage ultimately stems from the Latin manus, which means hand. It also came to mean manage came to mean how to wield or use tools. So essentially, management is sort of how to use or leverage some productive, valuable resource like a horse or a tool and sort of get it to do what you want. Leadership, obviously, it basically means to guide, to march ahead of, to accompany or show the way. So in some sense, these two things are similar or the same in that you're trying to basically get a productive resource to the ultimate desired destination. But in one sense, it's more sort of handling, managing, sort of moving, and in the other sense, it's sort of guiding. So a lot of people use these two terms, management, leadership, interchangeably. They're a little bit different. There's a lot of overlap though. So, why are we talking about leadership, right? Everybody who takes the time to watch this talk, your time is valuable. A lot of your consulting, you earn money based on your time. So why spend 30 minutes talking about leadership? Well, leadership is hugely impactful. we're in an age of leverage. Many of you may have heard of Naval Ravikant talk about leverage, but basically, a leveraged worker, which is basically a worker who has access to technology and capital, can outproduce a non-leveraged worker by a factor of 1,000 or 10,000. For example, a good software engineer, just by writing the right piece of code, can literally create billions of dollars of value for a company. But 10 engineers working 10 times as hard, but making the wrong decision can produce something of very little value. So right, every individual employee nowadays, every individual person with the power of leverage can produce huge value. And I have personal experience with this, and and I'm sure many of you as well. I was at a company called Mello that, with 20 people, was worth $100 million, over $100 million, right? So, obviously value is not equally distributed across the people, but on average, you could say each person was contributing around $5 million of value, right? So the value of people nowadays is much, much larger than it ever has been before, because of the leverage that we have access to with technology and capital. And so if you're saying, how many of you would say that on average, on your average work week, you're operating at, 100% efficiency, right? I very much doubt that, right? Some days are better than others. Some days you have that 100% day and you feel really good. You felt really productive. Others days when you're sick or you're not feeling well, you just feel less productive. Maybe it's a 50% day. But, let's say that on average, you're performing between the, 80 to 90% range over a sustained period of time. It's pretty high estimate. I don't know about you, but, consistently hitting 90% productivity is a sort of a goal of mine.
Yeah, almost impossible.
Right. And so, if you're talking at the scale of a $100 million company, if everyone's operating at 80%, you're maybe leaving $20 million of value on the table, right? There's untapped potential. So what would be the value of being able to get people to operate at 90% regularly instead of 80%, or 85% instead of 80%, right? We're talking millions of dollars of value created. And you can hire an all-star team, but a company with good leaders that's getting, 90, 95, 100% consistently out of, A tier, B tier employees is going to outperform a company that has the best employees, but they're only getting 80% out of them. University of Chicago published a paper that if you replace a lower 10 percentile boss with a higher 10 percentile boss, so basically you replace a bad boss with a good boss, it's like adding another worker to a 9-member team. And the effect of good managers on good workers is greater than good managers on bad workers. So there's this compounding effect where if you have a good manager on top of good workers, you just get incremental value, right? So there's this huge value in sort of the upside of good leadership, right? With the leverage that we have today, the $100 million companies, good leadership is important. But there's also the other side, which is sort of the downside of bad leadership. Workers assigned to bad bosses are more likely to quit. And basically the downside of bad leadership is exactly that. It's retention. We're talking about the discrete binary event. You either have this employee or you don't. Good leadership is sort of continuous. You can get 80%, 85%, 87%, continue to get more out of each of your employees. But the downside is very binary. It's you lose somebody or you don't. And according to Statista, the third leading cause of people quitting their job is uninspiring or uncaring leaders. And I would even argue that the first two points here, lack of career development and inadequate compensation, those can also be impacted by leadership. So, staff turnover costs businesses billions of dollars a year. When you're a 20-person company, if you lose one person, and that's a critical person, just think of the impact that can have on the company, right? So good leadership, super important. Bad leadership, also super important, but in a negative way. And so we understand that, leadership is super important, but in addition to that, I think leadership is undervalued and underprioritized right now, especially in Latin America. It's not talked about enough, which is why we're talking about it today. In Landa, in our group, in our community, out of the 77 people on the sort of active community table, only 3 people have leadership, team management, and or management consulting in their superpowers. right? That's all three of those categories: leadership, team management, and management consulting. Only 3 out of 77 have it, right? And this is an extremely diverse and talented group of people, right? We're, top tier in our industry. We have great experience. There's over 100 superpowers listed, right? That's a huge, broad range of skills and talents. Only 3 people are talking about this stuff. And at a high level, CEOs, the companies will pay tons of money for CEOs to have mentors, courses. They have a board of advisors, but the rest of the org kind of falls short, right? What do you get when you become a manager? Like a PowerPoint presentation and like a little, 30-minute course or something that you have to take, right? So, I think that leadership is important and under prioritized. All right. And the last point I want to talk about before we get into like the actual meat of the leadership principles is sort of, who am I? Why am I the person talking about leadership? As a recap, I was in the military in the United States for 6 years. I've ended up holding management positions in every single job I've had since I graduated college. I've managed up to 30 people, repeatedly get positive feedback, and even promotions and career progression based on sort of management and leadership. And just to give a couple of key examples, when I left Uber Rides operations team to go to the payments team, every single person on my team applied for a position on the payments team. So every single one of my reports applied to sort of follow me to the other area, the other line of business. While at Uber as well, I was an L3, a level 3, with level 3 direct reports. So I had people my same level reporting to me, which doesn't normally happen. We weren't a huge team, but we were in charge of one of the largest markets for Uber globally. And that was all because of leadership, right? I wasn't the best analyst. I wasn't the best at queries. I didn't work the most. In fact, my boss once mentioned that I was the person who spent the least hours in the office. But, hey, I got the work done. And so all of this career progression and opportunity came because I knew how to lead people. And I demonstrated that, and they trusted me to do that job. And doing that job, I had a lot of success. During COVID layoffs, my team was the only team to not lose anyone. Every single other team in the org lost people. Mine didn't. And we were the only team to hit all of our comp targets, our compensation bonus targets, right? No other team basically achieved what my team did. I have a couple other examples I don't want to spend too much time on because we're short on time, but feedback from managers. This is from the Marine Corps. SNM means said name Marine, which is referring to me. Is a natural leader, routinely provides sound advice to his seniors. Something important to note is leadership goes in all directions, right? You don't have to be a manager necessarily to be a leader. A lot of what I did in my career is lead upwards, providing feedback, providing sound advice to my seniors in this case. Here at Uber, these are direct quotes from managers of mine. Jules has given me very tough and valuable feedback that has allowed me to improve and do better for the team. Jules looks to deliver feedback to upper management and has pushed me to become a better manager. So there's this constant theme of pushing people to do better. And then also downwards, looking at reports, finds the right balance. And you guys can read this later, but basically these are direct quotes from people that I've managed. So that being said, we've talked about how important leadership is, how under prioritized it is, why I'm talking about it. Let's sort of get into some of the principles that I think are important, that have served me well personally in my career, and that I think it's important to learn about. And as a disclaimer, before we get into leadership principles, a lot of people say they have their own like leadership style. It's like, oh, this is my style. It's like, no. Unless you understand the fundamentals, you don't get to have a style. You're just a bad leader, right? I had a manager, a boss of mine previously had 75% attrition in 1 year in his report line. And he blamed it on misalignment and poor cultural fit. Like, nope, you're just a bad leader. You don't get to do that. It's like if you're a software engineer and your code doesn't work, you can't say, oh, it's just my style of coding. No, it doesn't work. You have to actually make your code work before you can add your style and your flair. So we could go over, there's a lot of content, a semester's worth of content that we could talk about, right? The United States Marine Corps 11 Principles of Leadership. We could go over the sort of 4 laws of combat leadership. But, there's tons of information. We only have a short amount of time today. So I want to go over sort of one key point that I think is most useful and I think is most lacking in the sort of corporate civilian side, that I think the military does well. And that is the concept of commander's intent. So if you've heard of Jocko Willink or read some of his books, Extreme Ownership, you may be familiar with the concept. But I want to sort of go into detail and depth about sort of what it is and why it works and how it's been useful. So what is commander's intent? The closest sort of comparison in the corporate world is basically it's compared a lot to mission statement or like vision or even like an objective or an OKR, but it's different, and we'll go into details as to why it's different. But what it is basically the expression of the purpose of an operation. It must be clear, concise, and easily understood, and basically includes how a leader envisions, a decision and the conditions that accomplish the purpose, right? So that's sort of the technical definition. Basically, it consists of sort of what the purpose is of what we're doing, what the goal is, and what the end state. So those are three key elements to the commander's intent: purpose, goal, end state. Something interesting about it is it's intended for both the sort of planners and executors in the military, or in the corporate side will be the reports and the managers, right? It's not a high level strategic statement. It's not just meant to go down to managers and then they act on it. It's meant for everyone in the company at all levels to understand and to sort of use as guidance. And it also will continue to change and be modified based on what's going on with the situation, right? How the situation develops. As opposed to a sort of a mission statement where it's one statement and it's global and all inclusive and it lasts all year and you never change it. Like that's the mission of the company. The commander's intent will happen, that there will be a commander's intent for every single operation the military does, right? Every time people mobilize, anytime we want to accomplish something, there's a commander intent, right? So it would be sort of like having a commander's intent or sort of a mini mission statement or an objective for every project on the corporate side. Right? So every time you want to do something, you have a commander's intent. And so what does it look like? Here's a clear example, which is, restore the blue land border, which is the purpose, by, which is the method, maneuvering through existing or created gaps to bring our combined arms combat power to bear against the Orange Land 102D and 103 armored brigades and 401st and 402nd artillery regiments in order to, which is the end state, defeat the Northern Operation Group and have our forces positioned along the border, prepared to continue offensive Operation Orange Land if directed. Right. So there's the three elements here. It's very clear. It's very precise. It's something that basically gives guidance at all levels, right? If you're the manager, you understand sort of what's going on, what's the high level objective. If you're the person executing, you understand exactly how the commander intends for you to fulfill that mission, right? So that's sort of an example of what it is. And to give an example of sort of the output, basically what it can produce in a company, I'll give another example. During World War II, during the sea and airborne invasion of France on D-Day, they had been planning this invasion for years, right? British, Canadian, American airborne forces, they planned, they rehearsed like the military does, precise series of glider and parachute landings, designed to secure bridges, road junctions, other key terrain. Basically, they would go in first and allow all of the ground forces and sea forces to sort of get onto the beach and progress through the territory, right? And when it actually happened on D-Day, the parachute forces faced, huge German, resistance, and basically the parachute forces dropped into unmarked landing zones. The gliders were in the wrong areas. Thousands of soldiers from different units were mixed together, like in the middle of the night. It appeared to be a disaster, right? From a planning perspective, the execution was horrible. Nothing went as planned. Yet only hours later, the original military objectives were accomplished by ad hoc units, right? Basically, the commander's intent allowed leaders and soldiers at all levels, no matter where they landed, to form up into these sort of ad hoc miscellaneous groups and complete the mission. They seize bridges, key terrain. They allow basically the advancement, and that's sort of one of the ways that the Second World War was won by the Allied forces. Right, so that's sort of the output of what a good commander's intent can do. It's something that ranges from high level strategy down to low level sort of tactical implementation. Basically, it exists so that when shit hits the fan, nobody's asking, now what do I do? Right? And that's the ultimate goal of a good commander's intent in any business, any group, any organization. It should basically lead to nobody ever being uncertain of what they should be doing, right? And that leads to productivity. And so why is that better? Why is this better than what currently exists? I think a lot of time, if you've talked to senior leaders in a lot of companies and startups, there's sort of this hesitancy or this kind of friction against implementing a mission statement or a vision statement or implementing OKRs. Managers, leaders sort of leave it as sort of the last bit. They procrastinate. They don't want to do it. Right. Startups are very notorious for sort of not, formalizing their goals and objectives. And the reason that happens is because there's often sort of a lack of strategic or tactical impact from these, mission statements and OKRs and objectives and goals. Right. They don't actually impact or influence the way people work and the output that's happening. They're seen as sort of an afterthought. It's like, okay, so this is what we're doing because everybody sort of, we're all working together to get to this goal. So let's sort of write a mission that, basically just describes what we're doing. It's sort of post facto instead of pre. And so a lot of leaders sort of don't understand the value. They'll say that, objectives and OKRs and mission statements are important, but they don't really understand why or sort of how it influences the company. So, how often have you heard in your career an employee say or even do like, hey boss, I didn't know what to do, so I just referred back to our company's mission statement and then I came up with this plan. Right? Like nobody has ever said that. Nobody has ever like looked at the mission statement of the company to decide what to work on this week. It's they just look at the project or the objective that they have, for this quarter or this week or whatever the case is. And so, that's one of the reasons that leaders fail to sort of prioritize these things, because generally they're ineffective. Whereas commander's intent is something that really has a direct impact on how people work, how people operate. And another thing that leaders do to sort of counteract the fact that these mission statements and OKRs can seem somewhat unimpactful is they go super tactical, right? So instead of figuring out, instead of using commander's intent, they say like, our objective is to maximize profit in the next quarter, which, by the way, is not a good strategy, even if your objective is maximizing profit in the next quarter. Like they just go super narrow, super tactical, and they just completely lose this higher level strategic influence, right? And so what's happening is that you have, one of the reasons this is an ineffective system, or what currently exists in corporate America and Latin America is ineffective, is you have the purpose element in the mission statement or the vision statement. You have the goal element in sort of like the vision or the OKR state or level. And you have the sort of end state element in the sort of key results. So they have these different elements, right? They have the purpose, the goal, and the end state, but they only have one of each at each level of the company. You have a purpose at a high level, you have a goal at a medium level, and you have an end state at a low level. You should have purpose, goal, end state at every level of the business. These things shouldn't be split up like they are. And so that's what commander's intent sort of allows. And we'll go into a little bit more detail of sort of how commander's intent allows that. One, the first thing is the purpose element, right? Having a purpose, stating a purpose allows people to align themselves to your purpose. And that's hugely important for employee motivation and output. If you don't want to motivate people. You don't want to have to constantly be motivating your employees to come into work and to give their best, right? That's a losing task, right? It's not sustainable. You're going to have a lot of variance. There's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. What you want rather than that is for people to have sort of a higher, or for you to have a higher order purpose, and to allow people to see how their work contributes to that, and that's something that they also want, right? And there's been studies on this. If you get half a group of employees to write out a plan on, how can I be a better employee, and another half to write, how can I put my life together properly? The people who plan their life and that plan somehow involves the business are 10% more productive, right? If you can get people to understand how their work there aligns with sort of making their life better, and aligns with your mission and your purpose, they're going to be more productive than the people who you just tell what to do, right? And if there is no alignment, then maybe that the people should find a different job, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? And an alignment doesn't have to be super deep either. You can make people understand how by producing good results, the company does better and the employees will grow faster, and that allows them to earn more money, which allows them to have a better quality of life, right? This doesn't have to be super deep and profound. It can be an alignment as simple as that. But basically, by stating a purpose, you allow other people to align with your purpose, right? So that's one of the key elements that makes commander's intent important. Employee alignment, right? So think of employees as vectors, right? Vectors have a direction and a magnitude. Magnitude is basically productive output, like how much effort, how much output a person is producing, right? A person with a large magnitude is somebody who's super productive. And direction is their alignment with the desired outcome or objective, right? Every little line in this picture, I made this a while ago, represents an employee. Each of the little arrows of different colors represents an employee. So as you can see, they don't really reach the goal, right? There's plenty of potential there. There's plenty of magnitude. They could reach that goal if they were all aligned, right? But what you're seeing here is basically wasted effort. It's magnitude that's not pushing towards the desired objective, right? And on the x-axis, you can kind of see that this reaches number 17. Whereas here, when the effort is aligned, these are all the same little colored arrows, right? There's the same number of employees with the same magnitude, but with better alignment. Here they reach on the x-axis 22, right? Whatever arbitrary number you want to refer to. But basically you can see here how the same employees with the same effort, the same productivity, the same magnitude in this case, are able to go much further when they're aligned. That's another thing that's really important with commander's intent, is that stating the purpose, the goal here being the critical piece, and sort of the end state. It gives a clear idea of how everyone can be aligned towards the same objective. And the last thing the commander's intent allows, that this is sort of one of my personal favorites, is decentralized command, and this is a huge one. Basically, this is just autonomy. It gives people autonomy to act and to be efficient without needing guidance at every single step, right? So when something happens, Apple changes their marketing ID and all of the marketing campaigns don't work anymore. This allows you to avoid like the meetings, and then you go up the chain of command. Like, what do I do? Okay, well, let me ask my boss. Let me ask my boss's boss, and then it goes down the chain of command again. You sort of get okay, well, this is what he said we should do. Okay, let's have a jam session, and then make a decision, implement. Like basically you're delaying the time between problem, decision, implementation by weeks, when you have to sort of go back and forth up and down the chain of command. Decentralized command allows people to just operate based on what they know is the intention, right? I don't need to ask the CMO of the company what to do, because it's pretty clear to me what the end state is, what the objective is, what the purpose, why we're doing it. So I can just operate independently and figure it out myself, right? And this is great as a manager, because it allows you to be less involved. It allows you to micromanage less. It allows you to take a break, right? This is something that means that you can go on vacation for a week and the company's not going to fall apart because you have this sort of decentralized command. People are able to make decisions on their own. And additionally, this allows reports and people lower down in the hierarchy to get experience as the next generation of leaders, right? It allows them to use sort of their perspective and manage and direct and command their own area without having to always follow orders from somebody higher up. So, this is key here. Also, with the rapid rate of change in modern business, things are changing so quickly. This is hugely important nowadays, more than ever. Decentralized command is actually how insurgent groups in the Middle East and terrorist groups were able to beat the US military in a lot of small combat, because the US military, the most powerful military organization in the world, was getting repeatedly beat, getting their ass handed to them by these like small insurgent groups. And it's because they were able to be so agile and reactive to what was happening on the battlefield, because they had a system of decentralized command. People could see what was happening and make decisions on the fly to better serve their objective, because they were able to do that. They didn't have to go to higher headquarters to get approval to do something that was going to take 2 weeks to do. So decentralized command, super important. And then just a couple other important principles that I like for management and leadership, just to quickly go over, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Having the answer isn't enough. Pay attention to the questions that are being asked. A lot of managers think they're doing a good job if they're able to answer all of the questions people ask, reports ask. But if you have the answer, if the answer exists, if it's a problem that's already been solved, people shouldn't be asking the question. You need to ask yourself, why are people asking me this question if it's not a problem or not an issue, right? Uncertainty wastes mental space. It creates stress. It creates more uncertainty. It makes people ineffective, right? So if people are asking you questions and you have the answer, that's not enough. You're not a good manager because you can answer questions, okay? It's also your responsibility to preempt issues. You should be telling people things before they have to ask them, all right? The second piece is establish a relationship. So you don't have to be like personal friends, or you don't have to do the whole like we're a family here at the company and we all love each other. That's that's uncomfortable for some people, or it's just not how you operate as a manager, right? That is sort of a style thing. But the element of establishing a relationship is important. People should know that you care about them, and you should care about them because of what we discussed earlier. People who are aligned, who feel a sense of purpose, who feel how or understand how the business is contributing to their life, they will be your better performers, right? So you should actually care, and you should make them know that you care. And that does a couple of things. One, it allows feedback to be much more productive, right? If you have an antagonistic or not great relationship with somebody, as soon as you try to give feedback, they're going to become defensive or aggressive even, but basically it's just not going to be effective. If the person knows that you care about them, that you understand what they care about, and that you're trying to push them towards what's good for them and what's good for the company, as defined by the aligned mission of the two, they're going to take it better. Third thing, never say actually. This is like a personal pet peeve of mine, but also it's hugely important. And I hate when I see this, is when people say, hey, that's actually a good idea, or hey, this is actually pretty good. Saying actually implies that you thought it wouldn't be good. Saying actually implies that like, oh, I would have assumed that you would have had a bad idea, but this is actually a good one. It doesn't add anything to the context. Just say, hey, that's a good idea. Just don't say actually, ever. And the last point, you don't get to disagree with feedback. This is something as well that a lot of managers will try to argue or disagree with what somebody says, right? And as with the first principle, having the right answer isn't enough. The content isn't what's important, right? If somebody is sharing their perspective with you and they say, hey, I think you are preferentially promoting salespeople over customer experience people. It doesn't matter if you are or if you aren't, right? You might say, no, I'm not. Actually, I follow the actually, right? I follow the process that we have in place, and I'm hiring people based on the guidelines that the company has given me. It doesn't matter if that's what you're doing. What matters is that the person has a perspective that you're doing something else, right? So you don't get to disagree, you don't get to explain, you don't get to reason. You always have to accept the perspective, the feedback, and then decide how you want to respond to that. You may be doing things correct, but if everyone thinks you're doing things wrong, it's up to you to decide if you want to change that perspective or not. So with a couple minutes left, we can go to Q&A. And yeah.
Thanks, Jules. It's been a treat to listen to you, and I'm sure it will be for everyone who watches for the recording. I don't know if you have any questions, Pablo. If not, I'll sneak one in.
Not really, and I apologize for land too late, but I going to watch the recording.
No worries, it's asynchronous anyways. So my question, Jules, is, and I don't know if we'll have enough time, but how do you balance, right? You, as a leader, you should be genuine, right? You should be also in many ways vulnerable. But I found, and I've been on both sides of this, that sometimes if you don't manage your mood or you don't manage yourself, like it filters down, right? If I'm angry all the time, or if I'm super anxious, so you can see how that filters down to the people who report to you. So how do you balance actually having control over yourself and being very intentional about it, with at the same time being genuine and vulnerable? I'm just curious about what your take is on this.
Yeah, so I mean, that's another area that we could go super in detail with. I'll try to give a quick response, but leadership is nuanced, and that's why it's hard. If leadership were one or the other, if it were always do this, or always do this, or always be vulnerable, or always be cold, it would be easy, right? You could just say, I'm gonna just do this all the time. Everybody would be a good leader. The reason most people aren't good leaders, and good leaders are hard to find, is because it takes a very nuanced understanding of when to do what. And this is one of those cases. I completely understand the example, because I've done the same thing. It's right where in my case, is you're getting bad leadership from above. How do you shield the team, from that leadership, but also indicate to them that it's not your fault? Like, you don't want them to think that it's your fault that everything's going wrong, but you also don't want to say, hey, it's all his fault, and our management, our leadership in the company is terrible, right? You have this balance of like, how much do I give and how much do I sort of take, right? And so the answer, like, of what to do and how to do it, I think it's very much, you have to have a good read on the situation. One, it will depend on the reports, right? There are certain people who respond differently to certain stimuli. There are certain people who will get super stressed out if you say, hey, the CEO of the company is making some bad decisions, I'm having to sort of deal with the outfall. People will stress out and they'll freak out. There are other people who'll be totally cool with that, who'll say, okay, it's all good, I trust you. So how you speak to each of your reports and each of your team will depend very much on sort of what they need in order to basically be effectively productive. When it comes to vulnerability, I'm super open and honest and transparent with my teams, right? And for some people, maybe that could be seen as sort of like too personal, or not enough boundaries. But I've seen it work well, basically because I'm able to handle it well. And I think one of the things is, you don't have to always be one or the other, right? There's a time and place, right? You can be super transparent and vulnerable with someone in a one-on-one, and then at the end just say, like, hey, it is what it is, let's get back to work, and then put on a different face, right? You don't have to choose one angle and then constantly go that angle. You can adapt, right? If you're out, in an offsite, you can just be kind of chill. And then when you're at work, you can be more serious. So I don't know. It's very nuanced. It's hard to explain in 2 minutes, but we're out of time.
Yeah, thanks again, Jules. That made a lot of sense. And yeah, let's try to make it a series if you're open to it. Like we covered commander's intent, and then we'll go over the other principles. That'd be great.
Yeah, definitely something we can do. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, guys.